Good Sunday morning and welcome to another edition of At Issue. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. So much to get to this week, including the presidential race, which seems to be changing by the hour. Charlie Chippio and Kate Norton will join us to talk about it.
We'll also catch up with Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll about some major issues. But we start off with the Republican National Convention that was anything but conventional. For the third election cycle, Donald Trump is the GOP nominee. On Monday, he announced Senator J.D. Vance would be his running mate. How's this for unconventional, Sue? A man who once compared Trump to Hitler now walks in lockstep with the former president.
And the theme of the week was unity, and it was on full display, mostly because of the absence of anyone who's ever spoken out against Trump, save for his former primary opponents, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, who both endorsed Trump in front of a crowd of delegates in Milwaukee.
On Thursday, after accepting the party's nomination, the former president delivered the longest convention speech ever. For the first 15 minutes, he recounted the assassination attempt. He kissed the helmet of the former firefighter who was killed in the shooting in Pennsylvania and expressed gratitude for the country's support.
When I heard a loud whizzing sound and felt something hit me really, really hard on my right ear, there was blood pouring everywhere, and yet in a certain way I felt very safe because I had God on my side.
Then Trump returned to the forum that we've seen for the last 9 years, launching into a number of grievances and anecdotes and extended riffs about different topics.
That's crazy Nancy Pelosi, the China virus. They use COVID to cheat. They're coming from prisons. They're coming from jails. They're coming from mental institutions and insane asylums. Has anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter. He'd love to have you for dinner.
The former president also complained about his criminal cases and linked them to widespread calls to lower the temperature of political rhetoric in the wake of the assassination attempt.
As Susan Glasser for The New Yorker wrote, the former president may have had a brush with death, but he has not been reborn. He was the candidate that we have seen for nearly a decade. Joining us to talk about the RNC and what happens next with President Biden is Kate Norton, who served in strategic communication roles for countless campaigns, including Marty Walsh's mayoral campaign. She now runs Norton Communications. And Charlie Chippio is a senior fellow at the Pioneer Institute and principal of Chippio Strategies, LLC. Thank you both for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Kate, let's start with you. The RNC, was this a success in the eyes of the voters, the Republican voters, the independent voters, even maybe some Democratic voters?
Sure. I think there was an opportunity here for President Trump to deliver a speech that was uniting. But as we saw, he can't really help himself, right? Now, this is what works for him, this hyperbole, this sort of dramatic effect. And I think that appeals to his base. So in terms of did it move any voters, I'm not confident that it did. Does it change the vote outcome? Not necessarily. I think it appealed very much to his base.
Charlie, we hear a lot from suburban white women voters who are Republicans who say, you know, I don't like the tweets, I don't like these things, I might agree with him. He was much more mellow this time. He was saying some of the greatest hits, but it was a little bit more calmer. Do you think that'll move the needle for them?
The tone was different. I don't think it will move the needle for them, and here's why. He can't control himself. I mean, he can't control himself for any extended period of time. And so I think that, you know, we're looking at it today in July. The reality is that those voters are going to be seeing him every day between now and November, and he's going to be him. He's not really capable of controlling it to that degree.
Let's talk about the J.D. Vance pick. His stance on a number of hot-button issues,
Sure.
well known, opposes supporting Ukraine, said abortion should be illegal nationally, lies about the 2020 election being stolen, immigration hardliner, says climate change is not a threat. Charlie, what was this pick for? Usually, conventionally speaking, that VP pick is someone who can maybe help you in a swing state. I don't think anybody thinks Republicans are going to lose Ohio.
No.
There is a thought that he helps in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, but do you think this was more of a, hey, let's extend the map electorally, or this is MAGA moving forward to the next generation?
Yeah, what I think is that this was I think he helped somewhat with, you know, sort of that kind of working class white population. But really, I think this was the pick of somebody who is very confident that he's going to win. And so that he could pick the person that he wanted, who can, who will indeed be the next generation, carry on his legacy, that kind of stuff. It seems to me that that was the thinking there.
This is someone who was a self-proclaimed never-Trumper way back when.
He sure was.
Been the Ohio senator for 2 years now. Do you think Democrats can use that as a sort of cudgel against the Republican ticket, or will people just say, look, the vice president pick is just the vice president pick? It's Donald Trump that you really need to be talking about.
No, I think that the MAGA movement on the whole are sort of, around Donald Trump. They're sort of positioning J.D. Vance to be the next chosen son. Now, if that's this is also, though, a pick. I mean, let's not forget, right? He was never Trump until he wasn't. And that's not unlike a lot of the rhetoric that you hear from the Republican Party across the board. So I don't think this helps him any necessarily.
I was talking to Sue last week about just all the irony at this Republican National Convention. The Law and Order Party has nominated a convicted felon. The Party of Family Values has a nominee who once bragged about grabbing women by their genitalia. Is this it from here on out? Is the Republican Party Donald Trump's party, J.D. Vance's party? And even if they do lose this election in November, do you see, what some people call the MAGA fever ever breaking?
I think the MAGA fever will break in a way, but I think that it may take a different form. I think that until we get at some of the causes the things that caused it, the big income, I sound like Joe Biden. Inequality. That's the word I'm looking for. No, the income inequality, the kind of things that made people so frustrated in the first place. I think it will. I think it will take another form, though, because I think that elected Republicans, for the most part, they don't love this. This is not who they want to be. This is not where they want to be. They don't like these guys. And so I think that, they stuck with them through a bad 18. They stuck with them through a bad 20. They stuck with them through a bad 22. That was entirely, I think, Trump's fault. These crazy candidates like Herschel Walker and stuff. I don't think they stick with him again.
Yeah, Kate, the third nomination now that Trump has gotten, are Democrats, like when I talk to folks who are running campaigns or who are Democrats who are running, they say, well, we just have to run against these two different types of Republicans. Is it just now this is how the Republican Party is if you're running against one?
I mean, whether or not the Republican Party on the whole, or Republicans who are in office embrace this or don't, the party has embraced this. That was the theme of this entire week, was that MAGA, that aggression, that sort of. So, are there other Republicans that are more moderate? Absolutely, absolutely. Do I think that that's the mark of the Republican Party? Not anymore, because we've been watching this happen since 2016.
So Sean O'Brien, Greater Boston native and the head of the Teamsters, had a big surprise visit to some are saying it was one of the best speeches at the RNC. Some are, Kate. What's your reaction to his speech and his going into the den of the lions there, who he is theoretically fighting?
Yes, I'm sorry, my poker face is not very strong these days. But what I will say is, what I will say is, I think that it's incredibly naive of Sean O'Brien to go in there and suggest that this is going to be a different era of Republican Party. We know just from looking at the reports and the documents around Project 2025, they're opposed to labor. They don't want to help unions. They want to break that system down. They want right to work. So I think that not only does Sean O'Brien ignore that, but he also ignores all of the things that President Biden has done for unions, including protect his very own pension. So I don't know what was going on there.
I think part of it is that he knows that a lot of his members are going to vote for Trump.
Sure.
Does this give them cover then to do that, or does this also force the Democrats to say, hey, Sean, you got to come speak at our convention?
Well, that's an open question. You'd be better at answering that one than me. I don't know.
I mean, that's certainly not a decision that I make, but if it was, I wouldn't. I would say no. I mean, I think there is, again, there's a little bit of political theater to this, but also this is policy. These are things that are going to impact the lives of, and even his membership. I agree. I think that a number of his members want to vote for Trump, and he needed to give them some sort of reason. I don't know the answer to that, but I think that there's a responsibility on the part of the union leadership to educate their members as to why Joe Biden is the appropriate choice for them, what he's actually done for them, and what the platform actually says on the Republican Party's end.
One more question about the RNC, then we'll move to Biden. On Thursday night, we saw Hulk Hogan. We saw Dana White. When it comes to expanding the base and getting more voters on Team Trump, you have some pundits saying that this is an outreach to those maybe disengaged young white male voters. Do you think leaning into things like Bitcoin and crypto and UFC will help him spread that tent and bring more people into the party?
I don't know if it'll help him, but clearly that's the thinking. The Kid Rocks and the Hulk. Clearly that was the target with those people. And look, I also think it again. I think they feel like they don't really have to expand very much at this point. I think if they can just get some people who might be sort of predisposed toward them anyway and actually get them to come out, I think they're working around the edges at this point.
All right, let's shift to President Biden, obviously facing a ton of pressure to get out of the race from elected officials, from donors. If we check out this poll of 272 likely Massachusetts Democratic voters, of course, the base of the party, when asked if they're satisfied with Biden as the nominee or if they'd prefer someone else, 29% said satisfied, 64% said someone else, and that is despite 54% of likely voters saying they approve of Joe Biden and the job that he is doing. Kate?
I got to say, I think I can understand the concerns around President Biden, but from a practical standpoint, swapping out a new candidate at this point in the race, I have a really hard time imagining what that path to victory would be like. So I think there's a very practical implication here, and I would assume that that's not lost on the president. Him stepping out of the race as the candidate that we've spent all this energy and time on puts the party at risk and puts the election at risk in a big way as well.
Even if it's Kamala Harris, who's his VP?
I will say this. I believe that Kamala Harris would be a great option for this, but I also think I'm a little disappointed in us sort of as a party that we didn't spend the last 4 years sort of grooming her for that or creating that opportunity, because now we're in a situation that was the most likely scenario to happen for this particular president, and we're caught on the back of our heels.
Is there any other Democrat you think can beat Donald Trump other than Joe Biden?
Well, I would say this. I have a different view than Kate. First of all, I believe that defeating Donald Trump in November is an existential issue for American democracy. Let me be clear where I'm coming from on this. Before the assassination attempt, my view was that any other functioning Democrat could beat Donald Trump because, as I said before, I believe that Donald Trump, if you see him every day over a period of time, doesn't wear well. Okay, he's not a nice guy. All right, and so I thought they could have won. Now I don't know what the long-term impact of the assassination attempt is, but I would say this. I would say that I find it astonishing that he did not drop out on June 28th, that you cannot have somebody run for president after a performance like that. And I think that, there are results in terms of the possibility of having Trump and a Republican Senate and a Republican House. That is terrifying. And you understand, Kate, the insides of how this works better than I do. But what I would say is that America has made it very clear that they're not crazy about these two old guys.
Okay, we got about 30 seconds left. I'll ask you, when the president comes out of his COVID isolation period, what does the campaign look like? Because after the debate, after multiple interviews, it just seems, I was talking to you about this, it seems like a lot of people want to ask him about lowering the temperature, but he struggles to then pivot to talk about things like his record. So what does the campaign need to do if he is going to stay in? What do they need to do moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the receipts are there, right? If you go back and you look at the Biden presidency, you see that this administration was about creating opportunities for people, and the possibility of a Trump administration coming in flies in the face of that and does the direct opposite of that. So I think that the campaign after this That's a great question. What is it going to look like? But I do think we have to get back to talking about, here's what he did, student debt relief, or, the CHIPS Act, bringing manufacturing back. There's a number of things that we can look at that are proof in the pudding. That's what he's a great president.
All right, Kate Norton, Charlie Chipio, thanks so much for joining us on At Issue. Great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, up next, Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll.
We're going to get a progress report on the steps that she and the governor have proposed to deal with the housing shortage. That's up next.
Welcome back to At Issue. Last Sunday we had a grand plan to bring you an interview that we recorded with Massachusetts Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll. But things changed. There was the assassination attempt on former President Trump. That forced us to change our plans with the program and made us, as Bill O'Reilly would say,
do it live. So a week later, we're going to bring you that interview with the LG. We started by talking about the migrant crisis. Recently, the Healey-Driscoll administration banned migrants from sleeping at Logan Airport and sent state officials to the southern border to tell incoming migrants that there's no more room at the state's shelter system.
So our first question to the Lieutenant Governor was this: are those recent steps the result of not much having changed with the migrant crisis since last fall?
I think the issue is we're trying to do as much as we can, obviously, as a Commonwealth, but this really is a federal issue. We need Congress to act. We need help. We don't control the front door. We've done an amazing job of matching people up with work authorizations, getting folks hired. We've got stories of many, many employers who have utilized services. But the reality is this is a federal issue, and we need federal help to resolve it.
Sheltering these folks meant putting them in hotels and communities across the Bay State. We know folks, in Norfolk have expressed concerns about having these migrant families here, and their concern a lot of the time is about the resources, right? Public safety, schools, things like that. How do you get a message out to those folks that the state is on top of it, and that, yes, while resources may be strained, they're not going to be overwhelmed?
I really appreciate that. As a former local official, I was the mayor in Salem. We had a shelter in my own community when I served as mayor and recognized those initial concerns. That's why we're working so closely with school districts, with local officials to try and address impacts. So anyone taking on students receives additional resources and aid to ensure that they're addressing those impacts. We're working with communities to make sure they're not losing resources. And by and large, once individuals are in communities and families, I should say, are in communities, we see a bond and partnership being formed. And so we'll continue to work through that. But again, we're doing as much as we can as a state, and we're leading with our values. But we need a federal solution and federal action to really ensure that we're meeting the demands and the cost of all of this, for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned with the public schools. And I talked to a number of people who worked at public schools, educators last fall, who were just so sad, and that a child would show up at the school. The migrant family had dropped them off. They didn't know what language they spoke. They were working to try and give services to this child and make sure they were doing everything they could for the family as well. According to the most recent data, there's nearly 7,300 migrant families in the emergency shelter system. You're saying, obviously, that you're working to provide what the state needs to take care. Do you have any idea what they can predict for kids that might show up this year? Are there any services that they have access to just to make the process easier?
Absolutely. And I think as we've saw waves of new families arriving in larger numbers, we've gotten better at it, connecting folks with service providers, understanding what the impacts are on the ground, and meeting those demands. We've got service providers that work directly with families. We have our own state staff and a whole team we've stood up to work with local communities and school districts. We're paying additional aid to school districts that are hosting migrant families so that we can ensure they're having the resources to hire ESOL needs, additional support services. And we've seen community members step up. Lots of great partnerships. I've been at, Thanksgiving dinners thrown by community members for folks who might be staying in any of our shelter systems. We've seen communities hosting their own, community events. This summer, lots of kids in summer camp, and really trying to ensure that we're addressing this in a humane way. But I really need to make sure we're clear. We don't control the front door. We need federal action. We need Congress to act. Everyone is doing the best they can. Local partners, communities, school districts. This is something we need congressional action on to really help mitigate.
How would you say the numbers at the shelter system are? Do you think they're steady? Are they up compared to last year? Are they down? Are they trending in a certain direction?
We're pretty consistent. We put a cap on at 7,500 families. That's around over 20,000 people, half of whom are children. And we're continuing to see as people are getting jobs. Our goal is to get people on a pathway to independence. So folks are getting work authorizations. They're getting jobs. In my own community in Salem, we've got Salem Hospital. First time their housekeeping department has been fully staffed in years as a result of work authorizations and doing the matchmaking. And we're seeing that happen across communities. communities. Employers who need help, small business owners, larger corporations, anything we can do to make that matchmaking, get people on a road to independence is key here.
Without a federal fix, are you confident that we won't see the situation that we saw at Logan Airport pop up somewhere else in the Bay State?
I would say the transition of getting folks out of Logan Airport has worked pretty smoothly. That is not a place where you want people sleeping, especially young kids and families. So the transition of getting folks connected with either family members or friends or into certain circumstances that would be better than sleeping at Logan Airport is happening every single day. So far, it's been pretty successful. We're in our first week of it. We're going to continue to push and find solutions that as best we can at the state level, while also continuing to push Congress and federal agencies to help out.
All right, the last time you were here, our first episode, we talked a lot about housing.
Yes.
You guys had just hired Ed Augustus to come on to be the sort of housing czar. How are things going? How would you assess his performance as well? I know there have been a number of events that the governor has been out touting, new units that are about to come online. How are things going with the housing crisis that continues in Massachusetts?
I mean, housing is the #1 challenge that most people talk to us about every single day. No matter if we're in Greater Boston or out in the Berkshires, housing is a critical need across the spectrum. Older adults, younger adults, working families, you name it. We're continuing to, really press on this. We've got a major housing bond bill, the state's biggest investment in housing pending for the legislature. That'll be out by the end of July to provide tools and resources. We've got a whole cabinet working on addressing housing needs in communities. We're obviously implementing the MBTA communities law with the goal of trying to enhance the amount of housing that we have, transit-oriented development housing, smart growth, using land use policies to our benefit to create the housing that we need in our communities. The reality is we're harmed as a state. We're less competitive. We can't meet our workforce needs if we don't have the type of housing we need at the community level.
So Sue's going to ask you about the MBTA communities law. I do want to ask about the bond bill, though. Are you confident that it's going to pass?
We're working closely with our legislative partners. I think they realize the challenges as well. So we are hopeful and expecting that we're going to see a bond bill that's going to not only help us and the needs of communities, but also help the state be the partner that our locals need to get housing built.
And the communities that have been resisting the implementation, Milton, of course, as we mentioned, being sued by the AG. If that law is struck down, are you worried that local zoning will continue to be an impediment to address our housing concerns? And what's the update on all that?
Again, I'm a former local official, so we love our local autonomy. I understand that very well, but we can't have an ecosystem where we can't get housing built at a time we need it, especially affordable housing, workforce housing, anyone who hands you anything over the counter, or people pouring your beer or your coffee, right? Your favorite waitress. They need to live in our communities too. We're going to continue to push for that. We think that law is going to be upheld. And it's not just pushing for implementation of the law, it's also being a good partner. Technical assistance on the ground to help create the zoning. The vast majority of MBTA communities have already adopted their housing. So there's a few holdouts and there's a few that are concerned about it. We understand that. We're working with them to get them over the hurdle and feel good about what this can mean for our Commonwealth.
How are you all projecting for the increasing cost of supplies and the supply chain? I've heard from a couple of elected officials and local officials over the past few months that budgets that they had submitted, they're already washed out because prices are so high. We saw a report in the Boston Globe about Suffolk Downs and the developers there. Suddenly, like the cost of doing business is so high. How are you anticipating that?
One of the challenges of why we don't have enough housing is because it's expensive to build and the land is expensive, and it hasn't gotten easier over the last few years. We've got some tools within the housing bond bill, including things like the Momentum Fund to help the state take an equity position to really drive down some of the capital cost of building new housing. But it's going to take all of us and a lot of solutions to get there. We're trying to leverage state land as another tool that we have in the toolbox to leverage the production of, again, workforce and affordable housing in particular. And so we're not giving up. We are done admiring this problem. We're all leaning in, trying to make sure we have the housing we need to make our communities better, to be able to house the people that we care about every single day.
All right, in the time we have left, we want to get to two issues really quick. Steward healthcare, what needs to happen there?
Obviously, we want to maintain the type of quality health care that Massachusetts is known for. This is a private entity that has used greed as opposed to really caring about patients that has put us in this position. We're going to do everything we can to maintain jobs, preserve quality health care, stabilize our health care system.
Eminent domain on these hospitals?
Well, I think it's in bankruptcy. It's a complex situation. We've got the right people from the state working on this, and we'll continue to press.
And we'll get you out on a victory for the state. Tell us about the Cape Cod Bridge funding.
Super excited that we just got the last tranche of major federal funding, over $900 million, to help us develop and replace those bridges that are so critical to that region. Kudos to our federal partners. The governor has been pushing on this, going after every federal dollar that we can to ensure that we're leveraging those, not only for the infrastructure in a nearly 400-year-old state, but this is quality of life issues. These are jobs as well as we rebuild these bridges. So important work, and credit to the administration at the federal level for supplying these sorts of resources for states like ours.
Since we spoke with the lieutenant governor, lawmakers reached agreements on a budget deal and a gun reform deal. So some items getting taken care of on Beacon Hill.
Yeah, good to see that. That is it for this edition of At Issue. Coming up next Sunday, we're going to take a closer look at the crisis at Steward Healthcare and the strain on the Commonwealth's healthcare system as a whole. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of At Issue. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Have a great day.